Hello, everybody. So nice to see you. If you're able to turn your cameras on, please do so. But if you can't, we understand. Welcome to the final session of Honeymoon and Heartbreak, the life cycle of relationships. Today is all about action. Small, sweet steps towards rewiring our hearts. I borrowed that from you, Amy. After a relationship ends. Amy Chan and Dené Logan, who I'll introduce a bit later, will be helping us with those action steps. My name is Andrew Engel. I lead virtual public programs at Reimagine. I live in New York City, which is also known as Lenapehoking. That's the indigenous name of my home, the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. I acknowledge where I am to remind myself as a step to undo the damage caused by colonialism and white supremacy. Please let us know where you are zooming in from. My pronouns, by the way, are he, him. And for those who are zooming in without any visuals, I'm a white cisgender male with glasses, salt and pepper, short hair, a flannel shirt because it's still a little chilly in New York, and I've got an orange background on my wall. And my colleague, Nicole Tan, is with us today, and she'll be assisting us. Say hello to Nicole. Now, I want to tell you a bit more about Reimagine before we begin. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community, people of different backgrounds, different ages, races, and faiths, people of no faith, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other in facing adversity, loss, mortality, and to transform life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free and accessible to the public. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who already made a donation when you registered for today's program, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard parts into purpose and action. As part of this series, we've been exploring all sorts of topics throughout the year. We've looked at different aspects of loss, grief, and struggle through the lens of post-traumatic growth. Our previous series have focused on aging, money, career, climate change, and addiction. We've been asking a lot of questions as part of this three-part series on relationships. Last week, we heard powerful testimony. Actually, that was 2 weeks ago when we kicked off this series. We heard powerful testimony from a father who founded an award-winning nonprofit to help other divorced fathers struggling with the court system. And we heard from a woman who rescued her children from a fire caused by her alcoholic husband, and she now coaches others towards amicable divorce. And we had a woman who was raising her child with her male ex and her current female partner. And we heard from a teenage son of one of our guests who advises other children of divorced parents. And last week, thanks to Dené Logan, we had a wonderful workshop leader named Amy Brown who led us in some mindfulness exercises. She encouraged us to consider forgiveness. Who should you forgive? Who should be asking for your forgiveness? And the greatest challenge, how do you forgive yourself for what happened? Before we begin, I just want to offer a few pro tips. For those of you who wish, you can click on the CC icon on your Zoom screen to get a live transcript of what's being said. And you can save the chat by clicking on the 3 dots in the chat box. So please start using that chat box. And I'm going to say that as you hear Dené and Amy speak, if you have questions along the way, pepper them in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A at the very end of the program. And of course, if you have any technical issues along the way, feel free to send me a private message or a private message to Nicole. We'll try to help you out. Okay, I am so pleased we have Amy Chan and Dené Logan together in conversation. This is the first time they're meeting. They are two leading authorities on healing hearts. And my hope is that we'll have some insights on how the death of a relationship might lead to discovery and fulfillment. Both have chosen careers to serve others. PTG, post-traumatic growth, suggests that acts of service can help you grow after experiencing a wounding event, and it could help you find purpose. We'll be in conversation with Amy and Dené for about 45 minutes. And then I'll ask all of you to join some breakout sessions. Those will be for roughly 15 minutes. And we'll be giving you some prompts and some ground rules. And I'll explain those later. You'll come back after the breakout sessions to the main room. And that's when we'll have our Q&A with Amy and Dené. So now just a few words about these two marvelous people. Amy Chan hit rock bottom when she discovered that her boyfriend cheated on her. But the breakup was the shakeup she needed to redirect her life. I feel like that should be trademarked, Amy. Her New York Times featured book, which I enjoyed reading, Breakup Boot Camp, The Science of Rewiring Your Heart, was an instant bestseller, and she recently launched the Breakup Bootcamp podcast. So welcome, Amy. Dené Logan is a marriage and family therapist, a group facilitator, and a new author based in Los Angeles. She specializes in helping couples find more fulfillment in their relationships. Dené is also co-host of a podcast, Cheaper Than Therapy, and her first book, Sovereign Love, A Guide to Healing Relationships by Reclaiming the Masculine and Feminine Within, will be published in paperback and released in audio in May 2024. So pre-order now. Welcome to the two of you. Amy, I'm going to start with you. In your book, you describe your own experience of grief and anger after discovering the infidelity in your relationship. You have this great quote. You say, "I wasn't just mourning the end of my relationship, I was mourning the deaths of my identity and of a beautiful future that would never come." Mm. So these hopes and dreams were unended. Can you describe to me how this pain became the fuel for this new career that you had?
Yeah, when I was in that relationship, I thought I was living the dream. And back then, to me, living the dream was date, get married, have kids, live happily forever after. And so when the relationship fell apart, it was like suddenly this entire identity and life plan that I had so much attachment to, it was gone in an instant. And I just didn't know who I was. And it was as if there was a band-aid that was ripped off, and I had to deal with all of the pain from the past, the baggage, the neglect from my father, like all of those things resurfaced. And I didn't know that I had all of this accumulating. And so I just blamed it all on my ex and went into a very angry, rageful, resentful time in my life. And when I finally crawled out of that, and it took me quite a bit of time, I was like, I have a choice to make right now. Like, I'm either going to continue spiraling out of control, or I can take this energy and do something. I am going to look at this blank canvas and say, well, what do I want to paint? Is that the path that I want? And maybe after exploring it will be, it's the same, plan of date, get married, have children, or maybe it won't, but at least I will know that I was the one who came up with this plan and this story and this narrative. And when I was in my darkest moments, I was just struggling to find a place where I could go and get away from my apartment with all the reminders and learn about the type of pain I was going through, because my friends, they were over it. They're like, just it happens for a reason, like, why can't you just get over it? And that was just jabs of pain and shame. And I couldn't find anything. So when I was strong enough, I was like, I need to create what didn't exist for myself. And that's how Breakup Boot Camp, a 4-day retreat to help the heartbroken, was born.
Thank you. Now, to you, Dené, I want to hear a bit about your journey. You were married for 11 years. Um, that ended. And now you help couples discover fulfillment in their relationships. Can you share with us why this marriage ended and how you and your ex-husband were able to divorce with compassion? And I have to say, I heard the podcast with the two of you
Aw,
and was very touched by it.
thank you. Well, I appreciate that, Andy. And, I love to say our relationship, I mean, we have a child together, so it didn't end, but it changed form. And I think in so many ways, what was fascinating about when my marriage ended was I was living in the midst of this dichotomy of I'm primarily a couples therapist. So I work with people every day on how to find a little bit more fulfillment in our relationships. And there were so many themes as my relationship was changing form that I realized are sort of the consistent themes around what makes it challenging to have fulfilling partnerships. And some of it was what Amy touched on, that we are really conditioned to form an entire identity around partnership and this other person. And when a relationship ends or changes form, we are societally conditioned to see that as a failure. And, my husband and I, like, he's still, I believe, one of my life soulmates, one of my best friends on the planet. But we realized that our relationship changed. We were 25 years old when we met. I'm 45 now. And so, something I've come to understand is that if we are in a relationship with one person, each person is going to be in a relationship with like 6 different people, because we are meant to evolve. We are meant to change as people, as human animals. But the question a lot of times becomes, does it continue to make sense to evolve together? Are we still, does this container allow for our growth, for our expansion? Are we still in alignment with what we both want for our lives? And I really love to support couples in reimagining and sort of like reclaiming what constitutes a failure. My ex-husband and I have a beautiful 7-year-old boy together. We still, our kid thinks some parents are just best friends, and that's like all he's known. But there's nothing about our relationship that I would say constitutes a failure. So I really love supporting couples in saying, like, how do we live the truest, most beautiful relationship that we can possibly experience? And if that needs to end or change form, how can we reclaim this idea of a failure? Because I think no matter what, if we look at this as a life school and all of these experiences that we have are meant to teach us something we're meant to understand, this is the curriculum, then of course we've learned, of course we've grown. So how could that conceivably be a failure?
Thank you. Amy, earlier you brought up anger as a choice one can make in a situation like this. And, it's a grief stage that many of us have experienced. When is it helpful, this anger, in terms of growth, and when is it harmful?
Yeah, I see when I look at the stages of healing, and of course it's not linear. Um, I feel that anger is often a very helpful pit stop. Now, you don't want to stay in anger as like a destination, but when you get into anger or you allow yourself to tap into that, because I've also noticed sometimes women they're so conditioned to be like, sadness is okay, anger is not. And I know for myself, angry was seen as not feminine, not ladylike. That's not what obedient Asian girls do in my household. So it just became tears. And it was a lot of work for me to be able to tap into the anger, and that it's raw and that it's messy. And with the anger, I think that you can learn about, wait, what boundaries were crossed? What actions do I need to take? And so it could be a catalyst to catapult you out of depression, apathy, and get you into like, okay, I'm gonna use this and have some momentum and movement. And I would say that with a lot of my clients, sometimes I help them tap into it because they are in the let's put my ex on a pedestal. They are superior. I lost the best thing that has ever happened to me. And they're not living in reality. And once we kind of peel back the layers and we're like, well, this non-negotiable was crossed and this boundary was crossed, and they weren't really invested for quite a period of time. They're like, oh yeah. And you see them take them off the pedestal and actually tap into like, right, that actually wasn't right. Yeah. And they almost come out of this haze and they're like, that's not going to happen again. Or I don't want that in my future. And so, yeah, it's a pit stop to get them into another stage of healing.
Dené, I'm curious if you grew up in a household where it was okay to express anger, or it was normal to express anger.
I'm laughing a little bit as you say that, Andy. I think anger is complicated for so many of us. I would agree with what Amy said, for women especially, right? I grew up in a household where, I come from a depth psychology background, which is sort of this psychology that looks at like the psychology of the soul and like the collective unconscious and the things that maybe aren't on the surface of what we're looking at, excuse me. And so for me, anger was one of those shadow elements, right? Like you keep anger behind closed doors. You
Excuse
don't,
me.
yep. You don't,
Going. We're going to try to mute these folks. Keep going.
you don't air your anger out in the world, right? So I experienced a lot of anger from my mother growing up, and it was something that like I felt afraid of. I felt like I wanted my mom to be happy, and I really sort of internalized that like I didn't want to be an angry woman. And I think I got a lot of the messaging that Amy is describing around like that's just not the type of person you want to be. But I did have a lot of anger in my marriage that was sort of like this is the shadow elements of my life, not what I show to the world. But I think anger is something that a lot of times gives us an indication of like where we don't feel like we have agency over our lives, where we're sort of stuck in repetitive patterns, and feeling disempowered. And so if we can tap into anger, a lot of times is like our internal navigation system telling us something is off. Anger is something that's like it's going to come to the surface as long as we continue to relegate it to the basement. So if we can sort of say no, come on up, have a seat, like tell me what I need to understand anger, I think we can sort of befriend that anger as an ally to bring us into deeper relationship with ourselves, right?
Hmm. Dené, I'll keep going with you. We heard a bit about Amy's Breakup Boot Camp, the
Mhm.
book that became a manual after Amy,
Where was your book? I'm like, was your book out when I was breaking up? Maybe I don't think it was out yet. I needed it. Sorry, go ahead.
But I think we're all curious to hear about your new book. I'm curious to learn more about it. What I have read about sovereign love is that you write about the need to integrate masculine and feminine energetics, and we've been talking about female conditioning. So I'm curious to hear more about that as a way to improve our relationships, getting in touch with those sides. What does this mean?
Well, thank you for asking, Andy. So as I was saying a minute ago, I come from a background in depth psychology, which is really rooted in Jungian psychology. And Carl Jung was the first person to really speak to the fact that all of us have both masculine and feminine energetics within us. But we live in a society, from my perspective, that is really rooted in a lot of wounded masculine paradigms and ways of being, right? So it's very like competitive, productivity at all costs, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I got me. I don't need anybody else. All of these values that are not actually healthy masculine values or ways of being. But I would say like we're really all conditioned to relegate and disregard and hold with a lot of contempt are feminine, right? Even us as women, a lot of times, like what we think of as feminine qualities are a lot of times what I would think of are actually wounded feminine qualities. So needy, clingy, like overly emotional, like those actually aren't healthy feminine qualities, right? And so what I started to realize as I was working with couples is there's a lot of ways that in thinking there's another person that's going to come along. All of us were raised with fairy tales that taught us that like someone's going to come along and complete us, and I'm going to find the one who just gets me in the way that I've longed to be gotten or understood for a lifetime. And what that does is it really creates relationship dynamics where I like to say we hide out in our bunkers and we sort of don't continue to do a lot of our own developmental work, right? And so, what is our developmental work? That becomes really integrating the inner masculine and feminine. And so, for all of us, we all have a need for stability and structure and ways that we feel tethered to something. And that's our healthy masculine. But we also need aliveness and eros and adventure and tapping into our intuition. And that's our healthy feminine. So, my book is really about how we reclaim that sense of integration within ourselves so that we move away from codependent relationship dynamics where like you complete me and I'm okay if we're okay to I fill up my cup and I make sure that I'm sort of like taking responsibility for the way I show up in our relationship dynamics. And from that full cup, I'm able to pour into you and our dynamic. And if both people are doing it, hopefully there's some reciprocity in our relationships, right?
Amy, do you see any of those masculine, feminine energetics in the mostly female population that you work with?
I mean, I'm not a pro at the masculine feminine. I used to be really like considered a masculine woman because I was trying to build a career in spaces where they were predominantly men, and I would go into the room and do exactly what Dené was saying, and like don't be weak, pull your like pull yourself up, like, and I don't need anybody. And I I don't know if it what was that unhealthy masculine? Was that just not myself? But really I've gone through a journey of like, well, what is actually me and what is conditioning and what is what I'm told I should be like because I want to get this promotion, and like stripping those layers away and being like, oh, like I feel like crying. I'm just gonna cry. And people are uncomfortable with it. And that's okay. Like, I don't need to save you out of your discomfort because I have emotions. And it's been a complicated journey that I still haven't perfected. So yeah, I can't wait to read her book because I feel like I could probably use a few tips.
Hmm. I'm
Wow.
also thinking too, Amy, about, the children or the grandchildren of immigrants and how that drive, to succeed, that strikes me as like that could be masculine also as a quality.
Yeah, possibly. I've also been trying to look at like how much of my personality or identity is cultivated because of me, or was it absorbed through osmosis, or
Mm,
were they adaptations, right? I think that as a child of immigrant parents who are very poor, who my mother grew up in poverty, um, and she was very depressed. I learned at a very young age brilliant techniques
mm,
to be able to survive. And I'm 42 and I'm still being like, oh, wait a minute. This is an adaptation and it's actually wreaking havoc in my partnership. Oh, it's wreaking havoc in my friendships. And yeah, it's the journey of healing and uncovering is, I think, a lifetime game. And you unlock levels along the way.
So apropos of healing, um, Amy, you recently posted something on your Instagram that I found very brave and open. You said, quote, just because something is hard or even painful doesn't mean it's bad.
mm,
Helping my father during his final stage of life was one of the most challenging experiences I've ever faced. At times, I felt as though I was on the verge of emotional collapse. But even though my heart broke apart, it also broke open. The grief softened me, making me more compassionate and more present. Can you tell us a bit about your relationship with your dad?
Yeah. So this is the thing about grief, and it really has broken open my heart. I think that before experiencing taking care of my father, who I had a very tumultuous relationship with him my whole life, I was able to package my emotions and be like, they're here. And it served me very well because I was able to climb up the corporate ladder. I was able to build a business. Um, but in ways I disassociated. And when I was going through this journey of helping this man who my whole life I have looked at as a villain, I don't know if it was like a conscious decision or just something that happened, but I was like, I'm just gonna feel it. And things started to change for me. I started to feel it all. So the lows were very, very low and very intense. And the littlest things, seeing a bird, like walking down the same path I walk every day and noticing the trees would make me just marvel in awe. And I cry. Like it doesn't go like into this compartment anymore. It comes at the most inopportune times, at interviews, at talks like this when I wasn't planning on it, and I just allow it to happen. And I feel like it's made the grief kind of pushed the edges of my heart, and it's made me have a bigger capacity for love, a bigger capacity for compassion, to understand the suffering of other people, the grief we all go through. It is very human. And I feel like if we can tap into that and not bucket it as bad or good or weak or strong and just be like, this is what connects us, I think we would have a better world. Thanks for being witness to this.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I want to say that I want to appreciate everyone who's posting in the chat now. And if you have questions for Amy and Dené for the latter part of the program, feel free to put those in. We'll start collecting those. I want to continue talking about this psychological body of research that Reimagine has been leaning into, post-traumatic growth. Part of that growth, according to the researchers like Richard Tedeschi, who has been working on this since the 90s, he states that producing an authentic narrative about your trauma, to accept what happened, and to continue writing that narrative is key. This is the idea that the story about that trauma, it took place, but there are more chapters to write towards a future. So, Amy, you have written that you can't change the past, but you can change the story that's associated with the history of a relationship. What are some examples of new narratives that some of your clients, both you, I'm talking to you, Amy, and I'm talking to you, Dené, some stories of your clients where they have created new narratives that suggest progression after trauma?
I can start. I think that I'll share just my story with the realization, which was, for years I held on to a narrative that my ex cheated on me, he was a villain, he messed up my life. And I would try to get other people on my side of that narrative. And then they'd be like, yeah, what a jerk, what a narcissist. And we would just go to town. And for a moment, it's like having junk food. It felt great. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, it feels awful. And I didn't know that this holding on to the pain and the resentment was the last part of the relationship I had left. And when the dots all connected, I recognized that you may not be able to change the events of your history, but you can choose to change the story you attach to those events.
Mm,
And when I had that realization, I went home, I wrote a letter, and it was a letter of this is what actually happened, not the assumptions, not the cognitive biases, but these are the facts. This is how I felt. This is what I learned. This is what I take accountability of in this relationship because it took two. And this is what I forgive and this is what I let go. And I sent that letter not expecting a reply, but it was very cathartic. And after that, I felt like that weight just lifted. And it's an exercise I do with our clients at every single retreat. We have them go through this process of energetically cutting the cord and letting go and doing these exercises to find the silver lining, find the lesson. And it's been really, really helpful because it helps you have agency and feel empowered that you are the author of the story. That was a chapter, and now you can write the second.
Amy,
mm.
I love that you wrote a letter. This is a great exercise. Writing a letter to someone, like, you don't even have to send it to that person. It's just a great tool. Dené, let's hear from you about some of those new narratives that you have heard from folks.
Yeah. First of all, I love what you just said so much, Amy. I think that's such a potent tool that I'm gonna steal and pass on. Thank you for that. And I think when I hold things with clients and certainly in my own life around, what you said, Andy, that I think is so important is a lot of what creates the suffering around our traumatic experiences that we're in the space of what happened and the story of why it shouldn't have happened, right? And I think there's a way that what can feel empowering when, first of all, bringing ourselves into the present moment around like where I am safe and where what happened is not actually the experience that I'm going through right now. So that's on a like somatic experiencing level, bringing ourselves back into our bodies. But then as we start to reframe the narrative, I like to bring some depth psychology into the conversation. And I think so much of that wounded masculine paradigm that I was talking about has been the identification with form. So the ego, the masculine elements of who we are, completely identified with these bodies. The soul is that we are more than these bodies, that we are we're having a human experience for a while, but we are actually spiritual beings, right? That we are not just these bodies and that there's a part of us that continues even after we leave these bodies. But if we think of going back to that idea of this is a life school, I really like to support clients in looking at our lives through what Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey of our life, right? And so each of these chapters of our life, whether it's a difficult breakup, the loss of someone that we love, are the dragons that we are slaying to teach us something that we are meant to learn along our path, right? So instead of circulating in that story of why this should not have happened, I like to really reframe the question around what did this come to teach me? Right. And sometimes that's my prayer in a really difficult moment. It is sort of continuously saying, what did this come to teach me? What did this come to teach me? And attempting to really, and that is not in any way to sort of rush to that space of making meaning, which, sometimes I can be a little guilty of doing, but really understanding that everything is happening in our lives in support of who we are meant to become. And we are being shaped, we are being chiseled by these experiences. But one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Caroline Myss, often says, we all believe there should be suffering somewhere in the world, just not in my house, right? So when these moments come to knock on our door, we're sort of like, what? This should not have happened. But I really find it more empowering to say, if we're all going to, like, nobody gets out of this life unscathed, everyone's going to experience something difficult. What does this moment come into my life to teach me?
Hmm. It's reminding me a bit about what I've heard from folks about grief. Like, let it come in. You don't have to offer it tea or cookies, but, and not necessarily be hospitable, but just acknowledge that it's there and know that this struggle will actually propel you towards something different and some
Mm,
self-knowledge. Um, Dené, you mentioned somatics and the body. just now, and I want to delve more deeply into that with the two of you. What role can somatics, mindfulness, meditation play as part of a holistic approach to grieving a breakup?
Oof, everything. I am, and this is funny for me to say as a talk therapist, but I also feel like more and more I am getting to the point where I'm just realizing the necessity and the potency of all of this somatic experiencing work. And that so often what is happening in our world, in our relationships, everything that, are like the largest pain points for us collectively are about us living our lives from the neck up, right? Like we're all in the intellectualizing, we're all in the like fear around where this is going to go if I don't go and, like get this under control. And even with some of what Amy was saying about breakups, I work with clients a lot when either a relationship between two people is coming to an end, or someone has faced a betrayal or something that has just like really rocked them to their core, and it feels really destabilizing. But so much of that destabilization is about the story I'm telling myself about what this means, normally about me, that is arguable, right? And a lot of times there's something historic about that story that is still living in our body. And it's so funny. During the pandemic, I loved to say to my clients, every day you got to be still for a period of time and you got to move for a period of time, because that was sort of like what I felt like kept me grounded in allowing myself to be still and contemplate what came up in that stillness. But also I found there was so much grief that I was holding, and I would do something called the class. Some of you might know it, but it's like a somatic workout experience. And like every day I would be like shaking and jumping, and all of a sudden I would just be sobbing, and I'd be like, why am I crying so hard? And it was that all of the trauma and all of the things that I was holding for other people and that I was experiencing in the world around me were in my body. But that's all of us, right? Like all of these experiences that we go through, we just hold them, and it's like we're holding a ball, I like to say, underwater. And then a lot of times that ball that we're holding, and we're doing all this work to hold all those emotions that Amy was talking about, like right there under the surface of the water, eventually they come up, but it's like because we've been doing so much work to hold it down, and it feels like it comes up in some maladaptive ways, in some ways that we're not necessarily proud of. But that's because we've been working so hard to like hold all of that down. Whereas if we can make it a practice to regularly get in our body and give it like a little bit of a release valve, I think we show up in all of our relationships a lot more present, and not just sort of allowing the fear in our head to sort of drive the ship, right?
Amy, you've talked about shaking in your book, right? At boot camp.
Yeah.
Tell us.
One of the most life-changing tools, and you got it right here, is when you're feeling that anxiety, whether you're ruminating about something in the past, or you're wondering if someone is going to like text you, or you got a bad email from your boss. Understanding what's happening in the body is so helpful. And we do this at boot camp, and I do this all the time myself. It's recognizing that, well, where is it first in your body? For me, it starts in the chest, right? It starts getting really tight, and recognizing like, oh, okay, adrenaline is now flooding my body, and so is the stress hormone of cortisol. So I'm actually having this biological reaction. Well, if you don't do anything, if you just sit there in your chair, what happens to these chemicals? So a really great tool, I put on a timer for 2 minutes and I just shake it out. Just
Mm.
like an animal would do in the wild, I shake my body from head to toe, and that allows those chemicals to metabolize and move through you. And then I pair that with some deep breathing exercises. I love doing the box breath. It's very easy. 5, 5, 5, 5. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. And then it calms you down, and then your logical part of your brain comes back online. So a simple tool that I do always, even if it's like a bad email that I get, instead of reacting right away, which is what this adrenaline is making you want to do, take action now, which you might regret later. Doing these 2 steps have saved me from severing relationships, sending bad emails, and many other things.
Before we put these nice folks in this group into breakout rooms, I'd love to hear from both of you what are some additional simple steps that folks can do to rewire their hearts?
Mm. Okay. Well, I love to talk about having a toolkit. And so a lot of cultivating your own toolkit is a little bit of trial and error. These are the things that I recognize really support me in regulating my nervous system and coming back into my body, as we were just talking about. So sometimes I'll have clients that will text me or call because they're having a panic attack. And I will say, um, without fail, do me a favor, take off your shoes, go out into, if you have like a yard or some grassy space where you can be in nature for a moment and just breathe as you walk around and tell me how you feel afterward. And inevitably, they always text me, wow, it's amazing. I feel so much better. I am consistently amazed by the human psyche and our ability to self-regulate when we come back into nature. It's like we know how to return to ourselves, but a little bit it's, we have so much technology and so many distractions and so many things that pull us away from ourselves. But really it's a lot of simplicity. It's going on a walk. I love to say, like, it's getting in a hot bath or taking a shower, just like feeling these sensory experiences that bring us back into our body. Um, I love a brain dump. I love to, get out a piece of paper and everything that's in my head, get it out of my head and onto a piece of paper to sort of eliminate some of that ruminating that we all can get into the practice of doing. But I think it's a lot of like, oh, these are the things that I have recognized really support me in feeling better. And I love to like write it down. Here's my toolkit, go down the list. Like, you know what? The grass isn't doing it for me. Let me try a shower. Let me call a friend. Let me check in with my therapist. Whatever's on my toolkit, one by one. What do I need today and right now? Right.
I love that. I would say something we do at Breakup Boot Camp is the overall theme is reframing your narrative. And people come in, we have them write their full story of their relationship, unedited, raw. And then we teach them how to look for cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are these faulty, irrational thought patterns that cause you to perceive reality inaccurately, and this amplifies stress and anxiety, and we all do it. An example of a cognitive distortion is catastrophizing, right? You had a breakup and you're like, I'm never gonna get over this, or black or white thinking, all or nothing thinking. And I have a whole list of this in my book. You can also find it on Google, I'm sure. But just like looking at what your current story is, asking yourself, is this story serving my future? And if the answer is no, it's causing you to mistrust people or think that dating is impossible at my age or in my city, then be like, okay, it's not serving me. What parts of the story are actual facts? And you might be surprised that there's quite a few things that aren't necessarily 100% true 100% of the time. And so you look at the list of different cognitive distortions, you start circling all of these thinking traps and these assumptions that you've put into your story, and then you start chipping away at it and start write another story. What is a story without those cognitive distortions and those assumptions, and how does that feel? And my clients, in the second step, they're like, oh wait, this feels a little bit lighter than that first one. Okay. And then we continue to chip away at it, step by step, and then by the end of the weekend their story changes quite a bit. Instead of it centering around this person did this and it's all about the ex often. It's about me. I learned this. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to try. I met all these friends, and their story starts centering around themselves and possibility. So I think that whether you are grieving or not, you can benefit from looking at the narrative that has been shaping your reality to this moment and asking yourself that question. And if it is not serving you, create another updated narrative that's a little bit more helpful and a little bit more true and a little bit more serving for the future you want to create.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we will now prepare to go into our breakout groups for about 15 minutes. I want everyone just to be mindful of the time that you're in there together. I'm going to try to do it so that we have 3 to 4 folks per group. Make sure that everyone in your group has a chance to share. And just remember, this is not about giving advice to one another. This is about active listening. This is about sharing your own experience. I'll be pasting, well, actually, Nicole, who's helping me out, will be pasting instructions in the chat for those who may need help while in the breakout rooms. And you may want to copy and paste that just to make sure you have that when you go into the breakout room. When we return, like I said, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions to Dené and Amy for about another 10 or 15 minutes. So I also now want to give you the prompts now for the breakout rooms. There are 2 of them, and Nicole will paste those in the chat. I'll also paste those again via broadcasting when you get into your groups. The first prompt is, if you have experienced pain and struggle in relationships, can you identify any new pathways or insights for yourself? The second prompt is there an action, even a small, sweet step that you want to take to navigate grief or heartache, or something that you've already done? Maybe something that Amy or Dené have already shared resonates with you. You can talk about that. And that's it. So now I'm going to get us ready. Okay, hold on. And I'm actually going to pause the recording because we don't need this. Welcome back, everybody. Hello, everybody. And thank you for turning your cameras on. Special shout out to one of our Reimagine collaborators, event hosts, Butterfly, who's here. Tony, it's great that you're joined us. Hello. And nice to see some of our regulars here. I see Erica is with us. So this is an opportunity for all of you to ask your burning questions for Amy and Dené. I think you're all enabled to unmute yourselves. So if you could just raise your hand physically or use the little hand symbol, that would be great. So we look forward to your questions. Okay. Tony, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, I'll kick things off. Really appreciated the breakout group and the generosity of the sharing that happened. My question is a continuation of our conversation. Some of us were talking about how we are in a place of kind of really moving away from tropes like "you complete me," "I'm looking for my better half," and we feel like that's been really healthy and helpful. For me personally, especially as someone who lives in New York, at the same time, I appreciate that I've created a life for myself that has, and I happen to be single at the moment, that has many wonderful things going for it. I'm also aware sometimes that can, for me, be something that I can turn to as a little bit of a defense of like, I have now had a great life without somebody, and I'm protective of that, and I want to keep that and not fall into those old tropes again. And so my question is how to walk that middle path and find that balance. I'd welcome your perspective.
I'll jump in, Tony. I love what you're saying so much. You're speaking my language. And I think a big part of why I love it so much is that I really feel passionate about the fact that I think we are shifting a little bit collectively in the way that we hold relationships. I think for a long time, there's a way that we pathologized singlehood as something that's like, well, this person's so great. Why are they still single? What's wrong? Right. And that's shifting a lot. And I believe that we are moving into a paradigm where we choose to join in partnerships when it's justified, meaning we have a shared vision. We really are aligned in what we want out of life. And it just feels like it makes so much sense to partner that how could we not? But I am in no way incomplete until this person comes along. Two things. I think what that requires is a lot more of an emphasis on community. I'm someone who is currently single, but unpartnered, I love to say, but in no way feel that I'm lonely. I feel like I really make a conscious decision and effort to surround myself with a lot of community and a really full life. And I think there are ways that I think that there's nothing wrong with what you're saying, right? I think that that's okay. I think that it is absolutely possible to live an unbelievably fulfilling life, and that you are complete right now. And if there is someone that you collide with, and it is divinely orchestrated, as I love to say, for you to travel alongside one another and support one another and who you're meant to become, beautiful. But it's like we're not holding our breath anymore, waiting for that day, because I'm already fully living the most beautiful life I possibly can right now, and unapologetically so. So love it. You're making my heart explode as you say that.
I love that. And I totally agree. And I think also it like celebrating a really full life with community and friends and all these things you've got going for you is wonderful. And I think we also have to ask ourselves and do a check-in. Are we associating past pain of like, oh, well, I was in a relationship before and I was restricted, or I couldn't do these things, or I was codependent, and maybe that's going to happen again, and I'm going to lose this part of me that I love right now. And the reality is you are an evolving, changing human being, and how you handle a relationship now, if it was to come into your life, would be very different than who you were maybe 5 years ago. And so I think, like, when I look at myself, all of these narratives that I had, I was like, no, they're going to take away my freedom, or, oh, I can't go off and work nomadically. I had to really be like, wait, are these like stories that I'm telling myself that are conveniently allowing me to push away intimacy, or are they actually true? So I hope that that's helpful.
Thank you both. Yes.
Okay, next we have Ikaet.
Yeah, hi, this is Akaita. Thanks, Andy, for the
Kaita.
it
There you
gave you
go.
an opportunity to pronounce the name, and I appreciate the effort there. Yeah, I had two questions. I am in San Diego, and we have a very sex positive community here, and a lot of the current generation does devalue monogamy. There's this whole movement around polyamory or monogamish. I didn't hear any talk about that. I wanted to see, because there's a lot of heartache that can be born out of you're in one relationship, but there's this other relationship that just ended, and there's the grief there as well, and finding yourself even when you're still perhaps partnered with one person or multiple people. So I was wondering if you had any insight there that you could share. And then another question, Amy, specifically to you. I'm a product of immigrant parents. My parents are Nigerian, and I think all immigrant parents is what I'm hearing, really push the masculine of you need to excel, doctor, lawyer, engineer. I'm a doctor. So I guess I hit one of the things that they wanted, but it also then was at a cost. I didn't really know how to engage emotionally with my partner specifically. It's like, cuddling, what is that? Like intimacy, like I thought it's just sex. Like, so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to how you're deprogramming around that upbringing of almost dissociating from emotion and only using logic. I hope that question makes sense.
Yeah. And it's Ikayet, right? Did I say that right?
Akaita. Akaita.
Aita. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I feel like going from 0 to 100 is never really a good idea, at least in what I've experienced. And so it is how is going from 0 to maybe 1 and then 1 to 5, and how does that actually look like? So intimacy can be very scary. It's very vulnerable, and that might not have been taught to you in your upbringing. Maybe that was seen as weakness. And so it could be as something as like doing question cards. It's something that I do with my partner, and my partner actually veers a bit more avoidant and I veer more anxious, and it's harder for him to reveal. So we'll do, like yesterday, we did a few question cards. We got a deck, and he was able to open up a little bit, and then we stop. And then like, a week later, we'll do something else. So I think it's just like trying these little things that get you out of your comfort zone, push your edge just a bit. Okay, you're not going to die. You feel okay. And then when you get a bit more used to and familiar with something, the human beings tend to like what we're familiar with. And that could be a great way of like kind of slowly getting your foot into whether it's affection, whether it's sharing intimate stories. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to make sure we don't have a whole lot of time, but I do want to get to some other folks who have their hands raised. Lynn B.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you all for sharing this space. Building on just that last one, I just want to talk about yes, intimacy, but that for me, it's like, and having it honored that you can be. I'm in a relationship that is going to have a 33 year anniversary, and but I've never, more so in the past, in my 50s now, but that I didn't, the be all, that person's not the be all and end all for me in terms of what intimacy can be. I was raised by a woman who believed in the strength of her sisters, not necessarily her biological sisters, but sisterhood is powerful. And my emotional intimacy has always been centered around my friends and slash sisters and brothers in that way. And these are no one that is biologically related to me. And but it's how to sit comfortably with those levels of where you're at. And, it's not like I need to leave my relationship because all those forms of intimacy are not being completed. Because I don't think one person should complete you. And it's not about being in an open relationship or polyamory. It's more about just, looking that love it comes in so many other ways. And, but it's difficult to talk to other people about that sometimes.
Yeah, I will jump in. I think with what you're saying, what I think is exciting is that we are living through a time where we are really conscious with the space of the questioning, being in the inquiry. And I think actually the point of relationships is to provide a mirror to show us to ourselves, right? I think that inevitably all of our most tender spaces of activation, our pain points, our wounding, our attachment styles come to the surface in intimate relationships. But I think what's fascinating about the conversation that is it Akaita, I hope I'm saying it right, was saying about all of the conversations right now around ethical non-monogamy or open relationships. I think what we are starting to see is that we are just in the space of exploration around how we can find fulfillment from an internal authority deciding that versus the external authority saying, this is what a healthy life looks like or a healthy marriage. And someone else has the rule book. And if you just follow it and have a picket fence, you'll be good. And we're sort of saying, well, is that true? I don't know if that feels true for me. But ultimately, I think the relationship that will always be the consistent is, what is this evoking within me? How do I tend to avoid myself sometimes? I think relationships, I like to say, can be a really convenient place to hide out, and sometimes to use other people as a pacifier to not have to sit with ourselves, as I heard you speaking to. So I think we're learning how to stay with ourselves in the conscious inquiry in a way that we never have before. And to me, that feels really exciting.
Thank you, Lynn. And unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. Jessica was first. So, and KG, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
So, thank you. Thanks for offering this. My question is about tips you have for identifying beliefs or assumptions that may be limiting us. So just briefly, like after a breakup a few years ago, I tried therapy for the first time. It was cognitive behavioral therapy. Maybe I just don't like CBT very much, but I found the tendency to like have these exaggerated statements, like a suggestion that I believe I'll never meet anyone again, or, I'm no good. And I didn't feel like I believed those things. They just, like I said, seemed kind of exaggerated to me. But yeah, so my question is how can we identify, thoughts that could be, damaging or unhelpful to us that aren't quite that extreme, I guess.
Yeah, I think like this is one of the practices we do at boot camp is rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. And maybe it's not the extremes, but it could be like, I'm too old to find love, right? Or it might not be an existential unhelpful belief. And so I think there might be a bunch of different ones that are percolating. I do have like a whole list in the book. But identifying like what is a belief right now that might not necessarily be true and might be holding you back. And then from there, you want to ask yourself, is this 100% true 100% of the time? Because you need to yourself recognize that it's not. And then from there, you create a more helpful belief that's a little bit more true. It's just like if you are only used to wearing black all the time and you get a stylist, and then suddenly your stylist is like, put on this sequin zebra outfit, you will reject it because it is way too foreign for you. It's going from 0 to 100. So the step of finding one, like almost like a rung of ladders, and you're going up one rung and then looking for evidence of that being true, then you get comfortable there, right, with that updated belief or that gray scarf, and then you can go up again. But you don't go from I'm not enough or I'll never find love again to I'm everything and everyone loves me.
Yeah, if I can just maybe add on, because I love that so much, Amy. And I believe that in every moment we are choosing between fear or love. Like those are the options. It's the option that brings me in alignment with love or me defending against what I'm afraid of. So if the thought that I'm thinking is something based on what I'm afraid of, I love to say, what would love say? If I believed that if I believed that I was held, if I believed that none of this is random, because it's not, and that all of these moments are synchronistically coming together to support me, how would I hold this moment in alignment with what love would say? And can I move in that direction a little bit more?
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yes, thank you both. Thank you, Jessica, and everyone else who asked questions. Thank you all for showing up. Amy and Dené, we will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone with this recording, with links to their books and to their websites. Thanks again to those of you who made a donation to Reimagine. And I wanted to encourage you all to register for next month's series. The theme is the pursuit of justice from inequity to integrity. So we'll be exploring justice through the lens of grief and growth. So that's it. And I hope to see you all next month at Reimagine events. Amy and Dené, thanks again so much. And hope to see all of you soon. Take good care, everybody.
Bye.